Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and today I want to talk about kind of breaking a rule. One of the rules that you hear about when you're photographing particularly people is this whole idea is that you don't want to cut off people at their heads or their arms. It can be a real distraction, and there are many times where you don't want to do that. You don't want to cut off part of somebody when you're composing a photograph. It's distracting, it's disjointed, and it just weakens the overall impact of the image. But as with any rule, there are times when you want to break the rule. And I chose 3 images in which the photographers did just that, yet the image is made all the stronger for it. First, we have a shot by Goran Johansson. He shot this with a Fujifilm X100T at 125th of a second at f2.8 ISO 200. Now here Goran cuts off the subjects at the neck, at the head, virtually right there at the chin, which is something that most of us have been trained never to do, right? But here it makes the image all the more interesting because even though the human face is the very first thing we go to in this shot, Goran is using the person as a graphic element within this overall composition, because this shot is not so much a portrait of this person as it is an exploration of pattern, of shape, and even tonality. That human face in this shot serves as a counterpoint to these horizontal lines that repeat themselves throughout the frame. And the contrast is created not just by that dark vertical line to the left, but also by the presence of his face. Because one of the things that you learn as you start photographing pattern is that it's not the pattern itself that makes a shot interesting. It's how you break up that pattern. And in this case, it's the human face and that bar on the left that breaks up the pattern and makes it interesting. Whenever I find myself being drawn to pattern, I will try to find something that will break it. And I think the choice here to sort of cut off the body of the subject here is a good one. It may have been a practical one because there may have been a reason why he wasn't in a position to show more of the subject. There may have been a car in the way. But regardless of the reason for it, I assume that it was a conscious choice to make the composition the way he did, just because of the attention he's taking in terms of what's happening on the left side of the frame. Having that dark vertical line here is also helping to sort of break up the frame, and the dark tone of that vertical bar is mirrored by the dark tones of the person's hair and his face, and it brings a nice balance to the shot. And I really like the presence of the lock there again to help sort of break the tonality, the dark tonality that exists within that frame. I think that this is I always talk about scanning the edges of your frame and paying attention to those because there's often distractions that exist here. But Goran, what he does here, he actually weights the image for the edges of the frame, and it results in a really interesting composition. Here we have a shot by Hanko Ye. I don't think we have any XF information here. And here we have a fellow who seems to be wearing some tissue around his neck for whatever reason. And he composes this shot so that this man's forehead is cut off just above the eyes. And that choice makes the image very, very jarring, especially because his glance is tilted upward. So immediately we're kind of tempted to think about, well, what is he looking at, right? And the abrupt composition here really brings that into emphasis because we're already going towards his eye, and that abrupt cutoff creates a nice sort of tension to the shot. But the thing that makes it kind of interesting is that tissue around the collar, right? Because immediately I'm trying to figure out what that's about. It looks like it's the remnants of maybe some tissue that he used for a napkin, but it doesn't make much sense. But I kind of like that about the shot. There's a lot to like here. I mean, the use of the flash here works really nicely because it provides that saturated color for his skin tone and especially that red tie, but it also creates emphasizes that contrast between the dark of his suit, the white of his shirt, his skin, and the remnants of that tissue around his neck. I think that cropping it the way he does really increases a level of tension to this shot that makes it work. Those two elements, that of his upward gaze and that tattered tissue around his neck, raises a lot of questions and tension, which makes it a shot that I just kind of linger on. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful photograph. And here we have a shot by Shweta Agarwal, a shot with a Ricoh GR2 at 1/400th of a second at f7.1 ISO 400. So here we have a shot where one of the men is basically, his face is cut in half. And it really creates a lot of drama in this shot. It's a really wonderful composition. We have these two faces that are in the frame, right? But we can see from the shadows that there's more than just those two there. The light is coming from the photographer's left. And so there are several other people who are present, whose faces we don't see, but whose presence is signified by the presence of their shadows. And they're all at a distance, and this guy is sort of at a medium distance. And if you imagine this shot made without this figure on the right being present, it might have been a sort of an interesting shot where you had this lone figure and you have the presence of these shadows and you have this sort of uniform, sort of red wall. And it would have been a kind of a neat shot. But bringing in this person that's on the right side of the frame into this composition, man, it creates an intimacy and an immediacy that wouldn't exist if it was just a shot of the guy who is in the middle area of the frame. Because there is a confrontational sense here of this guy looking directly at the camera. The guy on the left is looking at the camera as well, but we experience them very, very differently because of how far they are from the camera. A lot of times when we're photographing on the street, there's a relative distance that we typically shoot from that we're comfortable with. On average, it's about maybe 5 to 7 feet. And as I've talked about in some other videos, getting in really close and moving beyond that sort of comfort distance of what you have creates an immediacy, not only between the photographer and the subject, but between the viewer and the photograph. And I think that's what happens here. By cutting off the subject's face, it creates, like the previous shot, a level of tension and drama that I think really serves the photograph really, really well. It's jarring, and it immediately pulls our attention to that subject, even though the subject on the left is brighter, even because the contrast between the red and the white are much more dramatic. Our eyes are pulled to the guy on the right, not only because he's sharply in focus, but because of that immediacy. And there's this tension that's created between the guy on the left and the guy on the right. And then we become aware of the people in the background whose shadows we see on that red canvas. The shot ends up being a really complex but really effective composition. And the choice to include that fellow on the right, even partially, makes it so. So I hope you found that helpful. If you want to contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr poll, it's free. All you have to do is just ask to be added. It is not invitation only. I've heard some reports from people that they're trying to get in and they're getting a message somehow. If that's happening to you, please email me and let me know exactly what you're doing to get signed in. But otherwise, if you ask to be added, I'll be more than glad to do it. And if you've not heard of the Candid Frame is a photography podcast, which I've been producing for 10 years, and it features conversations with some of the world's best photographers. This week we feature photographer Castro Frank, who is a fine art, editorial, and street photographer who does some really amazing intimate portraits of people on the street. And it's really just a remarkable story, and I hope you take the time to listen to it and check it out. And if you like what you're seeing here, please subscribe and spread the word. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.